You really thought you belonged at this table, didn't you, Emily? Those words didn't come from a stranger. They came from my husband, Eric, right in the middle of his mother's lavish Mother's Day dinner. He didn't whisper them. He said them loud enough for all 12 guests to stop mid-bite, their silver forks hovering over expensive porcelain. The room, scented with lilies and roasted lamb, suddenly felt like an icebox. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, a deep crimson stain that I knew was visible against my pale skin. I looked at Eric, searching for a joke, a wink, any sign that this was some twisted prank. But his eyes were cold. Beside him, his mother Lauren smirked into her wine glass. She had spent the last 5 years making sure I knew I was just a temporary addition to their prestigious family line. Eric, please, I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. Not here. Why not here? He scoffed, leaning back and spreading his arms wide. Look at you. You're wearing a dress my mother bought you because you couldn't afford one that fits our aesthetic. You're sitting in a house that has been in my family for 4 generations, and yet you have the audacity to think you have a say in our future? In my family's legacy? The table erupted in low, cruel titters. Eric's sister leaned over to whisper something to her husband, both of them looking at me like I was a smudge on a clean floor. I looked down at my plate. My hands were shaking so hard the table was vibrating. I had spent 5 years supporting Eric. I worked 2 jobs while he finished his elite residency. I sold my car to pay for his father's medical bills when their liquid assets were tied up. I had been the silent engine behind his success, the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. editing his research papers and making sure his life was seamless. And this was the thanks I got? A public execution of my dignity on a day meant for celebrating mothers. You're a placeholder, Emily, Lauren added, her voice like silk over a blade. A girl from a town nobody can find on a map. You were a means to an end when Eric needed stability. But Eric is a man of status now. He needs a partner who brings more to the table than just gratitude. Eric laughed then, a sound that shattered the last bit of love I held for him. My mother is right. I've been thinking about the legacy of this family, the bloodline. It deserves better than what you can offer. I've already had my lawyer draft the papers. I wanted to wait, but honestly, seeing you sit here, acting like you're one of us, it's insulting. He slid a manila envelope across the white linen tablecloth. It landed right next to my wine glass. The word divorce was printed in bold black letters. I felt a strange sensation then. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger yet. It was a cold, sharp clarity. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they knew where I came from. They saw a girl from a small town with a nobody family. They saw a girl who had nothing. What they didn't know was that my mother, the woman they were currently insulting by proxy, wasn't just some small-town widow. They didn't know about the documents tucked away in my bedside drawer back at our apartment. They didn't know that the very land this ancestral estate sat on had a history they had conveniently forgotten. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I reached out, picked up the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. You're right, Eric, I said, my voice steady, sounding foreign even to my own ears. This family does care a lot about legacy. It's a shame you don't actually know what yours is built on. I looked at Lauren. Her smirk flickered for a microsecond, just enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve. I'll sign these, I said, tapping the envelope. But before I do, I'm going to make a phone call to my mother. She's been waiting for a reason to come back to this town. You just gave her the best Mother's Day gift she could ever ask for. As I walked out of that dining room, the silence behind me was heavy. They thought they were throwing away a placeholder. They had no idea they were pulling the pin on a grenade that had been sitting in their living room for 5 years. Before I tell you what my mother told me on the phone that night, and what she planned to do to Eric's entire family history, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been completely underestimated by people who thought they were better than you? Drop a yes in the comments and let me know where you are watching from. Also, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because the way this revenge unfolds is something you won't believe. I walked out of that mansion without looking back, the gravel crunching under my heels like the sound of breaking bones. My heart was thumping against my ribs, but it wasn't from fear. It was the adrenaline of a prisoner who had finally found the key under the floorboards. I climbed into my beat-up sedan, the one Eric always insisted I park around the corner so his friends wouldn't see it, and sat in the dark for a long moment. My breath clouded the windshield, blurring the image of the glowing windows where my family was currently celebrating my exit. They thought they had just pruned a weed from their garden. They had no idea they had just cut the main line to their life support. I reached into the glove box and pulled out my burner phone, the one I used to keep in touch with my mother's legal team. My hand was steady as I dialed the number I knew by heart. It was late, but I knew she wouldn't be sleeping. On the first Sunday of May, my mother was always awake, staring at the clock, waiting for the moment the statute of limitations on a 30-year-old debt finally expired. That moment was tonight. "Emily?" Her voice came through the line, crisp and sharp as a winter morning. There was no hello, no Happy Mother's Day. There was only the sound of a woman who had been playing a very long game. "He did it, Mom," I said, leaning my head back against the cold headrest. "He handed me the papers in front of everyone. Lauren called me a placeholder. They laughed at me." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning, the sound of a massive, invisible machine grinding into motion. "Did he mention the land, Emily? Did he mention the legacy specifically?" "He boasted about it," I replied. "He said the bloodline deserves better than me. He thinks he's sitting on a throne of gold." My mother let out a short, dry laugh. "A throne of gold, built on a foundation of sand. It's time then. I've spent 20 years living in the shadows of that town so you could get close enough to see the cracks. I told you when you married him that the best way to destroy a house is to live inside it until you know which wall is load-bearing. You've done well, honey." Most people think my mother is a simple woman. They see her modest house 3 towns over, her sensible shoes, and her quiet demeanor at the grocery store. They don't see the woman who was once the leading land use attorney in the state. They don't see the woman who was cheated out of her own inheritance by Lauren's late husband decades ago. My mother didn't want a lawsuit back then. She wanted a total eclipse. She wanted to wait until they felt the most secure, the most arrogant, before she pulled the earth out from under them. "I have the documents, Emily," she continued. "The original deeds from 1924. The ones that prove the northern boundary of the estate, the part where the main house and the winery sit, was never legally transferred. It was a clerical error that Eric's grandfather exploited, but he never actually owned it. I bought that debt 10 years ago. I've been paying the back taxes in secret through a holding company." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, you're saying—" "I'm saying that tonight, Eric didn't just divorce you. He alienated the only person who had the power to stop me from foreclosing on his mother's pride and joy. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., a notice will be pinned to their front gate. It won't be from me. It will be from the Sterling Group. They won't know it's us until it's far too late." I looked back at the mansion in the rearview mirror. It looked so permanent, so invincible. But I knew better now. I knew that the family legacy Eric was so proud of was actually a lie. They were squatters in evening gowns. They were frauds who had mistaken their cruelty for class. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Go back to the apartment," my mother instructed. "Pack only what you bought with your own money. Leave the dresses, the jewelry, and the fake smiles behind. You won't need them where we're going. And Emily, keep that divorce envelope. We're going to use it as the first piece of evidence when we prove Eric has 0 assets to his name." I hung up and started the engine. As I drove away, I thought about the way Eric had looked at me tonight. The disgust, the superiority. He thought he was a lion and I was a mouse. He had no idea that the mouse had been measuring the height of the gallows for 5 years. When I got back to our apartment, I didn't cry. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, reclaiming my life. I grabbed my old jeans, my books, and the laptop I had used to build Eric's career. I left his fancy suits hanging in the closet. I left the expensive watch he bought me with the money I had saved for our future. I didn't want any of it. It was all tainted with the stench of their arrogance. As I was leaving, I saw a small, leather-bound journal on the hallway table. It was Eric's legacy journal, where he recorded his thoughts on building his medical empire. I opened it to the last page. He had written, "Finally clearing the path for the future. Emily is out. The real work begins." I pulled a pen from my pocket and wrote one sentence underneath his entry. "The path is clear, Eric, but the bridge is gone." I walked out and locked the door for the last time. I had a long drive ahead of me, and a meeting with a group of investors who were very interested in turning a certain historical estate into a public park. The sun rose on Monday morning with a cruel, golden brilliance. I was sitting in my mother's kitchen, the smell of strong coffee cutting through the fog of my exhaustion. I hadn't slept a wink. Instead, I had spent the night spread out across the linoleum floor with my mother, sorting through decades of paper trails. We were looking at maps, old, yellowed survey maps that showed a very different story than the one Eric's family told the world. "Look here," my mother said, pointing a slender finger at a section of the property line marked with a faded red stamp. "This is the original parcel from the 1920s. Eric's grandfather was a clever man, but he was a bully. He assumed that because the original owners moved away during the Great Depression, the land was fair game. He simply moved the fences. He never filed the deed transfer because there was no one to sign it. He just took it." I leaned in, my eyes burning. "And you found the descendants?" "I did more than find them, Emily," she said, a cold smile playing on her lips. "I bought their claim. I spent every cent of my retirement fund 5 years ago to acquire the legal rights to that specific plot of land. It wasn't just a gamble. It was an investment in justice. For 20 years, I watched Lauren look down her nose at us. I watched her treat you like a servant. She thinks she's the queen of the county, but she's been living on a foundation of theft." At exactly 9 a.m., my phone began to vibrate on the table. It was Eric. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, a text message popped up on the screen. "What did you do? Why is there a legal team at my mother's gate? Emily, answer me now." I felt a rush of cold satisfaction. The notice had been served. The Sterling Group was officially claiming their territory. My mother had structured the holding company so perfectly that even a team of high-priced lawyers would take weeks to trace it back to her. By then, it would be too late. "Don't answer him," my mother said softly. "Let the silence do the work. The more they wonder, the more they panic. And when people like the Erics of the world panic, they make mistakes. They start grasping at straws." I watched as the messages shifted from anger to confusion, and then to a desperate kind of demand. Eric was used to me being his fixer. Whenever there was a problem with the hospital board or a dispute with a neighbor, I was the one who smoothed it over. He was so conditioned to rely on my labor that he was still reaching for me, even after he had thrown me away like trash the night before. I thought about that dinner party, the way the guests had looked at me with such pity and thinly veiled disgust. I thought about Lauren's wine-stained smile. They were probably in that mansion right now, standing on the wraparound porch, staring at the black SUVs parked at the end of their driveway. They were realizing that their impenetrable fortress had a massive hole in the wall. "We need to head into town," I said, standing up and smoothing out my jeans. "I want to be there when the realization hits. Not as his wife, as the representative of the new owners." My mother stood up, her eyes flashing with a predatory light I had never seen before. "I have the power of attorney papers ready. You are the face of the Sterling Group today, Emily. You are the one who gets to tell them that the party is over." As we drove back toward the estate, the familiar scenery looked different. The rolling hills and the white picket fences didn't look like symbols of status anymore. They looked like the boundaries of a crime scene. We pulled up to the gates just as Eric was screaming at a man in a sharp suit, one of my mother's associates. Lauren was standing behind Eric, her face pale, clutching a silk robe around her throat. She looked older than she had the night before. The mask of the grand matriarch was slipping. I stepped out of the car. Eric's head snapped toward me, his face contorting with rage. "Emily, thank God. Tell these people to leave. Some ridiculous company is claiming we're trespassing on our own land. Get your phone out and call the sheriff. They won't listen to me." I walked toward him, but I didn't stop at his side. I walked past him, standing next to the man in the suit. I turned to face my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband. "They won't leave, Eric," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet morning air. "Because they aren't the ones trespassing. You are." The look on his face was worth every year of humiliation. It was a mixture of total disbelief and the first tiny seeds of genuine terror. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "This is my family's land. It's our legacy." "No," I said, holding up a copy of the original 1924 deed. "It's my mother's legacy now. And as of this morning, your ancestral home is officially an illegal structure on private property. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises before we bring in the demolition crew for the renovations." Lauren let out a choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Eric looked from the paper to me, his mouth hanging open. He looked like a child who had just realized the floor wasn't there anymore. You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already did," I replied. "And Eric? Don't worry about the divorce papers. My lawyer will be sending over a new version. One where I don't just take half. I take everything that was never yours to begin to with." The silence that followed my declaration was heavier than the humiliation I had felt at the dinner table. Eric's face transitioned from a ghostly white to a mottled, angry purple. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched, but the two security guards accompanying my mother's legal representative stepped forward instantly. Eric froze. He was a man who fought with words and social standing. He had no idea how to handle raw, legal power that didn't care about his last name. "Emily, stop this nonsense," Lauren hissed, her voice trembling as she stepped off the porch. "You're making a scene. Do you have any idea how this looks? The neighbors are watching. Whatever little stunt you're pulling with these forged papers, it's over. I'll have my lawyers dismantle you by noon." My mother stepped out from the car then, standing beside me. She didn't look like the quiet, unassuming woman Lauren had ignored for years. She looked like a judge delivering a final sentence. "My daughter doesn't forge documents, Lauren. But your father-in-law certainly did. Or rather, he just forgot to file the ones that mattered. I've spent a decade retracing his footsteps. Every bribe he paid, every surveyor he quieted. I have the receipts." Lauren's eyes widened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine recognition. She remembered my mother, not as Emily's small-town mom, but as the woman her husband had stepped on to build this empire. The blood drained from her lips. "You," Lauren whispered. "You're that girl from the county clerk's office, the one who tried to stop the development." "I'm the woman who did stop it," my mother corrected her. "It just took 30 years for the world to notice. You see, Lauren, a legacy built on theft is like a house built on ice. It looks beautiful until the sun comes out. And today, the sun is very bright." Eric looked between his mother and mine, his confidence evaporating. "Mom? What is she talking about? Tell them they're wrong. Tell them the estate is ours." But Lauren didn't answer. She couldn't. She knew the history of the Sterling Group now. She knew it was a ghost from her past coming to collect a debt that had been compounding interest for a lifetime. "Eric," I said, catching his eye, "you told me last night that I was a placeholder. You said I brought nothing to the table. The truth is, I was the only thing keeping the table steady. While you were busy playing elite doctor and spending money that wasn't yours, I was the one monitoring the property taxes. I was the one who noticed the discrepancies in the land titles 3 years ago. I could have told you. I could have helped you fix it. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. But then you opened your mouth at dinner. You decided to humiliate me to impress a mother who has been lying to you your whole life. So, instead of fixing the hole in your boat, I decided to make it bigger. Eric's arrogance finally broke. He looked at the mansion, the grand columns, the ivy-covered stone, and for the first time, he saw a prison instead of a palace. Emily, please. We can talk about this. The divorce. I was stressed. I didn't mean those things. We're a team, remember? The desperation in his voice was pathetic. It was the sound of a man who realized his status was tied to a piece of dirt he didn't own. We aren't a team, Eric. We're a plaintiff and a defendant, I said firmly. I turned to the lead attorney. Ensure they have their personal belongings out by Wednesday. Anything left after 5 p.m. becomes the property of the holding company. And make sure the locks are changed on the wine cellar first. I believe Lauren has a taste for vintage bottles that she can no longer afford. As we walked back to the car, Eric started shouting again, a frantic, high-pitched sound that echoed through the manicured valley. But I didn't turn around. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of trying to fit into their world had been replaced by the thrill of watching that world crumble. Where to now? I asked my mother as we pulled away from the gates. To the bank, she said, checking her watch. We need to freeze the joint investment accounts before Eric realizes that his medical empire was funded by a line of credit secured against this very land. When the land goes, the credit goes. By tonight, his credit cards won't even buy him a cup of coffee. The bank was a building of cold marble and hushed whispers, the kind of place Eric and Lauren frequented to feel powerful. Usually when I walked in here, the tellers would look past me, waiting for the important person standing behind me. But today was different. My mother had made sure of that. We weren't here as the spouses of the wealthy. We were here as the executors of a new reality. As we sat in the glass-walled office of the branch manager, my mother laid out a series of injunctions that had been signed by a judge at dawn. Since the primary collateral for Eric's professional loans, the estate, is now under legal dispute and ownership has shifted, my mother explained to the manager, all lines of credit associated with the property must be immediately suspended to prevent the dissipation of contested assets. The manager, a man who had played golf with Eric's father for years, looked at the papers with a shaking hand. He looked at me, then back at the documents. This will effectively freeze his surgical practice's operating account, Emily. He won't be able to pay his staff or his lease by the end of the week. I know, I said, leaning back in the plush leather chair. I felt a strange, calm power radiating through me. But Eric was the one who insisted on a complete separation of our lives last night. He wanted me out of his legacy. I'm simply granting him his wish. If he's as brilliant and independent as he told the dinner guests, he should have no problem rebuilding from zero. While we were sitting there, my personal phone began to explode with notifications. Eric's tantrums had moved from the driveway to the digital world. He had tried to use his platinum card at a local bistro, likely trying to buy a drink to calm his nerves, and it had been declined. Then came the emails from his office manager, frantic about the administrative hold on their accounts. I ignored them all. I was watching the clock. The next step, my mother whispered as we walked out of the bank, is the social fallout. People like Lauren don't just value money, they value the perception of it. They live for the envy of their peers. If we take away their ability to host, to donate, and to look down on others, they cease to exist. We spent the afternoon at a small, sun-drenched office downtown. This was the headquarters of the local historical society. My mother had been a silent donor here for years, and today she was delivering a bombshell. We met with the director, a woman who had long been snubbed by Lauren's old guard social circle. I'm turning the northern acreage of the estate into a public conservatory, my mother announced, sliding a map across the desk. But there's a condition. It's to be named the Emily Miller Sanctuary, and the plaque at the entrance will detail the true history of the land, including the 1924 theft that the former residents tried to bury. The director's eyes lit up. This will change the entire social fabric of the county. Lauren has spent decades pretending that land was a royal grant. To have the truth displayed on a public monument, she'll never show her face at the country club again. That's the point, I said. By the time we left, the news was already starting to leak. In a small town, a story about a land grab and a frozen fortune travels faster than light. I received a frantic call from Eric's sister, the one who had laughed at me the loudest during the dinner party. "Emily, you have to stop this!" she shrieked the moment I picked up. "The florist just canceled the orders for my daughter's debutante ball because our family accounts are flagged. You're ruining a child's life over a petty argument." "A petty argument?" I asked, my voice as smooth as glass. "Is that what you call it when your brother tells his wife she's a placeholder in front of her peers? Is that what you call it when your mother mocks my upbringing while living in a house she doesn't own? This isn't about a florist, Claire. This is about the fact that your family's legacy was never actually yours. You've been living a lie on my mother's dime. I think the debutante ball is the least of your worries." I hung up before she could respond. The feeling of hanging up on them, of being the one to end the conversation, was more addictive than any luxury they had ever offered me. As evening approached, I drove back toward the apartment one last time. I needed to see the look on Eric's face when he realized the scale of the collapse. I found him sitting on the stairs of the apartment building, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hair a mess. He looked like the very thing he feared most, a man who didn't belong. "Emily." He stood up, his voice cracking. "I talked to the bank. They said you did this. You froze everything. My practice is going to go under in a week if I don't move those funds." "Then you better start moving, Eric," I said, walking past him to the door. "But you won't be moving funds. You'll be moving your clothes. I've already contacted the landlord. Since I was the only one whose name was on the actual credit check for this lease, ironic, isn't it? I've had you removed as an authorized occupant." He grabbed my arm, but I shook him off with a force that surprised us both. "How could you be so cold?" he whispered. "We were married for 5 years." "And for 5 years, I was your shadow," I replied, looking him dead in the eye. "You didn't notice the shadow until the sun went down, did you? Well, it's dark now, Eric. And in the dark, the shadow doesn't have to follow you anymore." The next morning, the unbeatable Eric didn't look so elite anymore. He was sitting in his car outside the apartment, his head resting on the steering wheel. I watched him from the window as I sipped my tea. He had nowhere to go. He couldn't go back to his mother's, the locks were being changed. He couldn't go to a hotel. His cards were pieces of useless plastic. But I wasn't done. Justice isn't just about taking away someone's house. It's about exposing the rot they hid behind the walls. My mother arrived at 10 a.m. with a man named Mr. Henderson. He was a forensic accountant with a personality like a dry crust of bread, which made him perfect for the job. We sat at my small dining table and he opened a thick ledger. "Emily, your husband's medical practice wasn't just struggling," Henderson said, adjusting his glasses. "It was a house of cards. For the last 3 years, Eric has been diverting funds from his surgery center to pay for his mother's lifestyle expenses. The country club memberships, the designer galas, the vintage wine. It was all being billed as medical equipment and consulting fees." I felt a cold shiver. I knew they were arrogant, but I didn't know they were criminals. "You're saying he was committing tax fraud to keep his mother in silk dresses?" "Extensive fraud," Henderson nodded. "And because you were the one managing the household bills, he made sure your name was nowhere near the business filings. He thought he was being clever, keeping you out so you couldn't claim a stake in the business during a divorce. But in doing so, he also ensured that you are completely legally insulated from the fallout. He, however, is not." I looked at my mother. She had known. This was why she told me to wait. This was why she told me to stay in that house until I knew where the load-bearing walls were. "Lauren knew too," my mother added. "She's been the one signing the consulting invoices. She wasn't just a bystander in Eric's life. She was the architect of his corruption. She raised him to believe that the world owed them a living, regardless of the law. The phone rang. It was the hospital board where Eric held his prestigious position. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. They were hearing rumors. They wanted to know why the Sterling Medical Wing donor funds had been flagged by the bank. The panic was spreading. I decided it was time for one final meeting. I called Eric. He picked up on the first ring, his voice sounding like he had been gargling glass. "Emily, please. I'm at a gas station and my card was declined for a liter of water. This has gone too far. Just tell me what you want." "I want you and your mother to meet me at the estate office in 1 hour," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I have the final settlement papers ready. If you want a chance at avoiding a criminal investigation, you'll show up." When I arrived at the estate office, a small stone building at the edge of the property, Eric and Lauren were already there. They looked like ghosts of the people they were 2 nights ago. Lauren was wearing a tracksuit, her hair unstyled, looking every bit the age she had tried so hard to hide. Eric's eyes were bloodshot. "Sign these," I said, sliding a stack of documents across the table. Eric looked at them. His face fell. This is a total confession. You want us to admit to the land title discrepancy and the fraudulent business expenses? Emily, this will ruin us. We'll never be able to work in this state again." "You already ruined yourselves," I replied, leaning forward. "The moment you decided that my dignity was a price you were willing to pay for your ego, you forfeited your future. You can sign these, hand over the remaining keys to every property you think you own, and walk away with your freedom. Or I can hand this ledger to the district attorney. My mother has already made the call. He's waiting for my signal." Lauren looked at me, her lip curling in a final, weak attempt at a sneer. "You were always a gutter rat, Emily. Even in my best clothes, you had the soul of a servant." "And yet," I said, smiling for the first time, "the servant is the one holding the deed to your bedroom. Sign the papers, Lauren. Or spend your golden years in a cell that's much smaller than your walk-in closet." Eric's hand shook as he picked up the pen. He looked at his mother, searching for a way out, but she just stared at the table, her spirit finally broken. One by one, they signed away the legacy they had used as a weapon against me. As they finished, my mother walked into the room. She didn't say a word to them. She simply picked up the signed confessions and tucked them into her briefcase. "The movers will be at the house at 4 p.m., I said as I stood up. "Anything that isn't in a suitcase by then is going to the local charity shop. I hear they're looking for high-end dinnerware. Maybe someone with a real heart will actually enjoy a meal on those plates for once." I walked out into the afternoon sun. I could hear Lauren starting to sob behind me, a high, thin sound that was quickly drowned out by the wind in the trees. The following morning, the front lawn of the estate didn't look like a private sanctuary anymore. It looked like a crime scene being picked over by vultures. I had authorized an emergency liquidation of the contents of the house, everything that wasn't bolted down or legally tied to my mother's land claim. I stood on the porch, wearing a simple black trench coat, watching as professional movers hauled out the velvet sofas, the mahogany sideboards, and the massive, gilded mirrors that had reflected Lauren's vanity for 30 years. To the world, it looked like a high-end estate sale. To Eric and his mother, it was a public execution of their social standing. "You can't do this, Emily!" Eric's voice cracked as he stepped out of a taxi, his eyes wide with horror. He was staring at a local antique dealer who was currently inspecting the very dining table where I had been humiliated just days before. "That table has been in my family since your grandfather stole the land it sits on?" I interrupted, not even looking at him. I kept my eyes on the clipboard in my hand. "Actually, Eric, I checked the records. This table was purchased with a loan that was defaulted on in 1988. Technically, the bank owns it. I just bought the debt from them this morning for pennies on the dollar." Eric looked like he was about to collapse. The elite doctor persona was gone, replaced by a man who realized he didn't even own the shirt on his back. Behind him, Lauren climbed out of the same taxi. She looked frail, her signature poise replaced by a frantic, darting gaze. She saw her favorite crystal chandelier being lowered into a padded crate and let out a strangled cry. "My things! Emily, those are my personal belongings!" she shrieked, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life raft. "Actually, Lauren," I said, walking down the steps to meet them, "according to the forensic audit we finished last night, nearly every luxury item in that house was purchased using consulting fees, embezzled from Eric's practice. Since I am still technically the primary stakeholder in the marital assets until the final decree is signed, I've decided to donate the proceeds of this sale to the local nursing school." I paused, letting the irony sink in. "I figured since you spent so much time mocking people who actually work for a living, you'd appreciate your legacy finally funding someone's education." The neighbors, the very people Lauren had spent years trying to impress, were drive-by spectating from their luxury SUVs. They weren't stopping to help. They were taking photos. In their world, failure was a contagious disease, and the great family was now patient zero. "Where are we supposed to go?" Eric whispered, his voice trembling. "We have no money, no credit. The hospital suspended my privileges this morning pending the investigation." "There's a small motel on the edge of town," I said, handing him a single key card. "I've paid for 2 nights. It's modest. No silk sheets, no wine cellar, just a bed and a TV. It's more than you gave me when you handed me those divorce papers at dinner." Lauren looked at the key card like it was a piece of garbage. "I won't. I'll go to the club. My friends will—" "Your friends are currently bidding on your jewelry in an online auction, Lauren," I said firmly. "I checked the guest list for your Mother's Day dinner. Every single person who sat at that table and laughed at me has already distanced themselves. One of them actually called me an hour ago, asking if the grand piano was for sale." The realization hit her then. The social tower she had built wasn't made of stone, it was made of shadows. And without the money and the land to cast them, she was invisible. I watched them climb back into the taxi, their shoulders slumped, their elite bloodline reduced to 2 suitcases and a motel key. As the car pulled away, my mother walked up beside me. She handed me a heavy, old-fashioned iron key. "What's this?" I asked. "The key to the wine cellar," she said with a wink. I thought we might want to toast to the fact that the placeholder just took the entire house. I looked at the key in my hand. For 5 years, I had been the one opening doors for Eric. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, my voice echoing off the bare walls. The house was finally quiet. The ghosts of Eric's arrogance had been packed away in crates, and the air felt clean for the first time in 5 years. But there was one last thing to do. My mother had always said that if you're going to pull up a weed, you have to get the root, or it just waits for the rain to grow back. I pulled out my phone and made the call I'd been holding in reserve. It was to the chairman of the County Historical Commission. "Mr. Sterling," I said, using the man's title with a touch of irony. "I have the final documents from the 1924 survey. My mother and I are officially donating the land to the state, but we have one condition for the deed of gift. We want the Sterling family name removed from all public records, including the commemorative arch at the town square." It turns out, the man who funded it never actually owned the land he claimed to be protecting. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a sigh of resignation. "Given the evidence you've provided, Emily, the board has no choice. We can't have a monument dedicated to a fraud. Consider it done." I hung up and felt a wave of peace wash over me. The family legacy Eric was so obsessed with wasn't just broken, it was being deleted. A few months later, I drove past the old estate. It was no longer a fortress of exclusion. The gates were gone, replaced by a welcoming wooden sign that read, "The Emily Miller Public Conservatory." Families were picnicking on the lawn where Lauren had once hosted her cold, judgmental garden parties. Children were running through the gardens I had once tended in lonely silence. As for Eric, I heard he's working as a general practitioner in a tiny clinic 3 states away, living in a 1-bedroom apartment and paying off the massive settlement he owes me. He isn't a man of status anymore. He's just a man. And Lauren? She moved in with her sister, who reportedly treats her with the same warmth Lauren once showed me. I sat on a bench overlooking the valley, the sun warming my face. I had lost a husband, a home, and a lifestyle I thought I wanted. But in return, I had found my voice, my mother's respect, and a future that actually belonged to me. I realized then that they were right about one thing. Legacy is important, but it's not about the names on a deed or the gold on a table. It's about the strength you find when someone tries to break you, and the grace you show when you're the one who finally holds all the power. The dinner party was over, and for the first time in my life, I was the one who got to decide what was for dessert. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps us bring more of these incredible stories to life. What would you have done in Emily's shoes? Would you have taken the high road? Or was this the perfect level of revenge? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you're looking for more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve, click the video on your screen right. You won't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the person who knows where the foundation is buried.